Good morning. So, Dr. Laura gave me a very high bar to follow last week with her discussion of naturopathic medicine. I'm going to do something similar but a little different with what physical therapy, how I see the profession of physical therapy, and also how I see myself as fitting into it. I've been a physical therapist for 19 years. My associate, Jane Galvan, has been in the profession for 28 years. She's also additionally, for 12 years, was core faculty at the Physical Therapy School, UCSF, San Francisco State, and is currently adjunct faculty with 2 different physical therapy schools. So between the 2 of us, we bring a great deal of years to our profession. I think what is more important than that is that we both share in common something that's very highly valued in our profession and that is actively recruited for, and that's the idea of being lifetime learners. There's constantly new knowledge coming out, and the idea is not that you get good at something and you kind of skate on it. It's that you get good at something and see where that leads you to be even better in the future. The technique that I'm going to talk about later that I'm most excited about, strain counterstrain, one of the theoretical bases for the kind of strain counterstrain I'm practicing right now is research that didn't come out till 2007. So that's less than 10 years of understanding about something very fundamental to human anatomy that is currently one of the techniques that I use. The full class for it won't be offered until next year. So I'm getting into these classes as fast as I can because it's the most exciting stuff I've learned in more than 19 years, because you learn a great deal as a student. Anyway, so what do physical therapists do? Physical therapists can do a great deal of things, which is both our blessing and our curse, because we are not, as a profession, what Todd would call very well branded. Because we are diverse, some of us do practice at a much higher level than others, and also there's just differences. So we're less well understood than some other professions, and that's the downside. The upside is that you can do an awful lot of different things, and I value that extremely. But I would say the 3 main classes of what I do, I've talked about in my infomercials, and I'm just going to go into a little more depth here today. I do get a 2-minute warning, yes? Okay, thank you. Number 1, exercise. Now, what does that mean by exercise? I'm very much a respecter of a physical therapist called Shirley Sarman. And if you were to boil down, I have a book of hers that's underlined more than any other book I've ever had. I read it and I think that's the main part about that chapter. And then the next time I read it, it's like, oh, but then I should underline this. If I were to boil down what she has to say, it would probably be the right muscle for the right job. And what that comes to often with the human body is that we can have compensatory patterns, usually where more superficial muscles are doing the job and deeper muscles are doing less. So oftentimes it's a question of turning on 1 or 2 key core muscles so that people can do their wonderful creative exercise routines, if they're lucky enough to work with someone like John, where they're recruiting everybody that they should be. Classic example of this is hip extension can happen with the hamstrings or the glutes. And what a lot of people do is they become what we call hamstring dominant. And that means they're not talking to their butt enough. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And if you get a really wonderful physical trainer, sometimes that's enough to get that butt to turn back on. But if the dysfunction's gone on for a long time and it's gotten more complex, sometimes you need different more modalities to get the person to find their glutes again. Similar examples exist for shoulders. But if you were to put it in one sentence, it's the right muscle for the right job, and the second one sentence would be the deeper muscles. The deeper muscles are the local control, and that's what you need. So number 2, physical therapists do ergonomics or body mechanics. And that can be I had a job where I did 100% workers' comp physical therapy, so I was in charge of getting people back to their jobs. Sometimes it was as simple as sitting at a computer, and by simple, I don't mean that's easy. I just mean that was not very varied. But I had one guy who was either airplane engines or truck engines. I can't remember what. But the only way he could fix them was he had to get in really weird positions. Because he essentially had to get underneath these mammoth engines. So it was my job to problem solve how could he do that without throwing his back out again. Anyway, that's a pretty big piece, because if you get people all better and they go back into a situation where they re-injure themselves, you've just wasted time. And that's deeply frustrating for the patient and the practitioner. I did a spontaneous worksite assessment a couple weeks ago, and I found that a darling patient of mine who's been getting better but has a ways to go, he's sitting in a broken chair. So of course, he can't do all the great postural stuff I'm teaching him because his chair kind of has him like that all day long, and he kind of wasn't really noticing, but he's typing like this, and that's making his neck go like that, and it's just undoing a lot of both of our good work. So second piece is body mechanics or ergonomics. And it can be also very relevant for parents, by the way. Picking up kids, huge. Manual therapy. I bill for manual therapy more than anything else. I'm very much a manual therapist. But what does that mean? That's the thing. It can mean all sorts of things. And lots of techniques are out there. But it's the way that with my hands I get the joints to go back in alignment, the tissues to relax, the muscles to remember how to turn on, would be what I would say. And I want to talk a little bit about strain counterstrain. I have 2 or 3 great analogies for strain counterstrain. The number one is it's like rebooting a computer. You've got a dysfunctional pattern going on, and how do you get it to turn off? Instead of just sort of taking a tight muscle and saying, we're going to stretch you, and we're going to stretch you whether you want to stretch or not. The original strain counterstrain was you slacked things, and you gave the muscle a chance to start over. The other analogy I have for it is it's very much like what I was taught first semester of PT school. They tried to teach us empathy, which was a very interesting class. But what a lot of that boiled down to was that when you were in a conflict situation, you didn't just put your point of view in the other person's face. You acknowledged you heard them. And that made them, in turn, more likely to hear you. So I very much think of the human body like a lot of people. So if you've got sort of a joint segment that's a little bit cranky, instead of saying to it something in front of you, say, so you feel like you're doing the dishes 7 days a week, and you're getting burnt out on that, and you feel like you're the only one that cleans up the kitchen, and it's getting you frustrated. And then this body part might say to you, yeah, I do feel that way. But I also know that you do most of the cooking and a lot of the shopping. And thank you. And with that bit of understanding, you can have a dialogue. So that's a lot of how I view strain counterstrain, is I'm not sort of forcing something to go back in place. Sometimes that works also. I mean, I've used those kinds of techniques for years. But this other technique is better. And it's the most exciting thing I've ever learned, and that's why I'm taking every class I can get, last year and this year. So the analogy for fascial strain counterstrain is a little bit like cat's cradle. Now, some men have done this as children, and maybe not all females have, but it's interlocking strings. And it's like if you were going to do a cat's cradle and pass it off to the girl next to you, you had to put the strings in balance. And what I think about is the human body, the connective tissue, is a lot of strings. So I am sometimes releasing connective tissue related to a blood vessel, sometimes related to viscera. But what is it really? It's just what is tying us together or connecting us, literally. And if you are releasing the tension on that system, it can go back into its normal balanced position. So that's, I'm still working obviously on this analogy because it's a little more complex, thinking of the connective tissue. This is what connective tissue up until 2007 was thought to be nerveless. It was thought to be just like dumb duct tape. And the research has now come out that it is innervated. So when you are releasing tension on these systems, you're talking to the nervous system. And the nervous system rules. So, but how do you get to the nervous system can be through many different paths. So, thank you.